We at Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness work on behalf of all of you, so we're an extension of all of you, and it's really our honor and privilege to work on your behalf. As Representative Sandell mentioned, I'm Chris Knopp, Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. As a child, like these kids here, I learned the vital importance of clean water. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, at a time when Cleveland became famous around the world for its water. It was a city where the river caught fire. Cleveland's economic decline coincided with this environmental calamity. Would you want to live in a place that was so dirty that its river literally caught fire? I moved to Minnesota and have raised my family here. My children and grandchildren have grown up in the land of sky blue water. Clean water is our identity in Minnesota. Clean water makes Minnesota a great place to live. Our lives in Minnesota revolve around clean water. This is where we teach our grandchildren to fish, catch fish with friends, and cement those friendships and bonds that make life meaningful. Clean water is Minnesota's most important natural resource. There are more than 1,200 lakes in the Boundary Waters and 11,842 lakes throughout all of Minnesota. We have the greatest of Great Lakes, as Senator McEwen said, Lake Superior, that holds 10% of the world's fresh water. We are the headwaters of the Mississippi River. For decades, our clean water has been under threat from copper-nickel sulfide mining, the most polluting industry in the United States. Sulfide mining is very different from Minnesota's traditional iron mining. Copper-nickel sulfide mining has never been done in Minnesota. Sulfide mining produces sulfuric acid, battery acid, when the mined rock is exposed to water. Right now, there are 3 proposed sulfide mines that threaten Minnesota's clean water. Twin Metals, owned by Antofagasta, threatens the Boundary Waters. Polymet, owned by Glencore and Teck, threatens Lake Superior and the Boundary Waters. Talon, owned by Rio Tinto, threatens the headwaters of the Mississippi River. In the controversy over sulfide mining, 2 things are abundantly clear. First, Minnesota simply does not have the laws to protect our clean water against this industry. Second, as our victories in the courtroom have shown, Minnesota regulators are unwilling to properly enforce the laws that are already on the books. We are here today not to demand extreme legislation, but to ask the Minnesota legislature to take common sense measures to protect what makes Minnesota a great home to 5 million people, our clean water. These proposed sulfide mines are owned by foreign megacorporations with long rap sheets of corruption, pollution, and abuses of human and worker rights. These billion-dollar corporations manipulate agencies and regulators, putting taxpayers on the hook to pay for the mess they leave behind. On top of this, these corrupt foreign companies are part of an industry that is so toxic, so polluting. There's never been an example of one sulfide mine that has operated safely and not polluted the surrounding environment. Why would we invite these foreign billionaires into Minnesota to pollute our water? Clean water is our heritage in Minnesota. We are blessed with clean water. The generations that came before me gave me a river in my hometown that caught fire. That was my heritage as a child. If we choose to bury our heads in the sand and twiddle our thumbs while foreign mining corporations grow rich from poisoning our clean water, we will not be able to look our children and grandchildren and all the students that are around here today in the eye. We will have defiled our heritage and broken that sacred trust and bond with future generations. The Minnesota legislature must not stand idly by. They have a job to do. They must do it. This morning we have a series of witnesses who will give powerful testimony in support of the bills that are currently before the Minnesota legislature to protect us from sulfide mining. We support the efforts to permanently protect the boundary waters from sulfide mining. We also recognize that sulfide mining is a threat to Lake Superior, the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and all of Minnesota's clean water. Sometimes the simplest questions are the most profound. The first legislation that we'll discuss today, Prove It First, asks one of these simple yet profound questions. Before we allow sulfide mining in Minnesota, shouldn't we first have proof that it has been done safely elsewhere in the United States? No proof, no mine. That's a common sense standard. Prove It First is not about blocking mining. It's about protecting Minnesota's most precious natural resource, our clean water. Once these sulfide mines contaminate our lakes and rivers, there's no going back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. We need common sense protection from Prove It First to ensure that we're not gambling with our future. Our first witness is Dr. Steve Emmerman. Dr. Emmerman is an internationally recognized mining expert who has worked on mining and water quality issues for over 40 years. It is now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Dr. Emmerman. Thank you, Steve. Have you come up here.
I'm Dr. Stephen Emmerman. I was a professor of geology for over 30 years. I have studied and worked in issues of water and mining for over 40 years. I will say three things today. One, sulfide ore mining poses a threat to clean water. Two, the sulfide mining industry has a perfect track record of water pollution. And three, the threat to clean water lasts forever. Sulfide ores are ore bodies in which the commodity of value, such as copper or nickel, is found in the form of sulfide minerals. Examples of sulfide minerals are chalcopyrite, which is a copper sulfide, or pentlandite, which is a nickel sulfide. When these sulfide minerals are excavated, crushed, and exposed at the surface to oxygen and water, they convert into sulfuric acid, with release of the heavy metals into the dissolved form. This reaction is especially problematic for the tailings, the wet and crushed rock particles that remain after the copper or nickel has been extracted, which is more than 99% of the ore body. When this mixture of sulfuric acid and heavy metals leaks into groundwater or surface water, it is called acid mine drainage. The copper and nickel mines proposed by Talon Metals, Twin Metals, and Polymet, now called New Range, would all be sulfide ore mines, while the existing iron ore mines in Minnesota are not sulfide ore mines. The sulfide mining industry has a perfect track record of water pollution. I repeat, a perfect track record of water pollution. During the moratorium on sulfide ore mining in Wisconsin from 1997 to 2017, 10 mines were put forward as examples of sulfide ore mines that had never caused water pollution. Each of these 10 examples was discredited because, in actuality, each of those mines really did have extensive records of water pollution. Now, these same 10 mines are being recycled as examples of sulfide ore mines that have not caused water pollution, although they have already been discredited, which is the best proof of all that there really are no examples at the present time. I encourage you to read my report on this subject entitled The Minnesota Prove It First Bill and the Myth of Sulfide Ore Mining Without Environmental Contamination. I will discuss one of these fake success stories. The Flambeau mine in Wisconsin was operated by Rio Tinto from 1993 to 1997. Only 4 years. Even to this day, Stream C, which crosses the mine site before joining with the Flambeau River, has a copper concentration so high that the stream is devoid of life, and the stream has been placed on the EPA list of impaired waters. The certificate of completion of reclamation that the mining company received in December 2022 indicated only that the mining company had completed its reclamation plan. It in no way stated that the reclamation plan had been successful in avoiding pollution. The notion that this kind of mining can be carried out without pollution of the surrounding water system is simply a myth. The threat to clean water lasts forever. The tailings will be permanently stored on the surface, so that there will be a permanent threat of leakage from the tailings or even a catastrophic collapse of the tailings disposal facility. Is this the kind of curse? I deliberately used the word curse. I did not say legacy. Is this the kind of curse that we want to leave to future generations?
No.
in Minnesota? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony today. I'm Fred Campbell, a retired hydrogeologist. In 1976 to 1977, I worked for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources on the regional copper-nickel study. In 1977 to 1978, I worked for AMAX, a mining company, on their copper-nickel sulfide deposit near Babbitt, which is currently leased by Teck and is now part of a joint venture with Polymet known as New Range Copper-Nickel. From 1988 to 2017, I worked for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Superfund program on dozens of state and federal Superfund sites throughout Minnesota. Copper-nickel mineral exploration data from numerous mining companies, including AMAX, Polymet, Twin Metals, and Talon, clearly show that the potential ore, waste rock, and tailings contain toxic chemicals and minerals. These toxics include, but are not limited to, copper, nickel, cobalt, arsenic, sulfides, sulfates, asbestiform minerals, and chlorides. I have some samples of drill core from the AMAX deposit that show and contain some of those toxics. An example of acid mine drainage currently exists near Babbitt, Minnesota. Approximately 30 years of taconite mining operations created stockpiles of millions of tons of sulfide-bearing waste rock, which they did not mine. Runoff and pollution from the stockpiles contains toxic chemicals that have exceeded numerous water quality standards since at least 1978. This pollution has not been controlled and is currently draining into Birch Lake. These toxic chemicals and minerals from sulfide-bearing rocks have been proven to cause adverse impacts to human health and the environment if they are released to air, soil, surface water, and/or groundwater. Releases of these and other toxics can have catastrophic impacts. For example, toxic releases at legacy sulfide mining operations in Colorado and Montana have resulted in significant human health and environmental impacts. Indeed, these legacy sulfide mining sites and districts are now included on the EPA's National Priorities Superfund list. In Minnesota, New Range Copper-Nickel, Twin Metals, Talon, and other mining companies are already looking at expanding their exploration and mining plans. These mining companies foresee a number of mining locations and districts across Minnesota. The combined detrimental effects of multiple sulfide mines and districts would be widespread. The impacts of sulfide mining releases from multiple mines and districts would be catastrophic to the surrounding environment. Plants, including wild rice, and animals, including fish, would certainly be poisoned by toxic releases from any sulfide mine in Minnesota. These impacts, in turn, would adversely affect human health across Minnesota. Minnesota's existing legal and regulatory framework cannot protect us from the dangers of sulfide mining. Minnesota needs to enact Prove It First and other legislation to permanently protect the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and other sensitive areas. Thank you.
And history is older than all of us. Yes. Good morning, everybody. Anin Buju, Miskowaskin, Nindijnakas, Magizi and Dodame, Mississauga, Gan, and Dunjaba. My name is Kelly Applegate. I'm the Commissioner of Natural Resources with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and I'm also a tribal member for the Mille Lacs Band. There is an Anishinaabe teaching that our people have. We are to care for the earth, for those yet unborn and the next 7 generations to come. If we make good decisions now, we can protect the earth and the water and know that the next 7 generations ahead can have a good life. Minnesotans have an opportunity to make a good decision to protect our water. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is currently reviewing a proposal for a nickel sulfide mine in Tamarack, Minnesota, located just 1.3 miles away from the homes of our tribal members and cultural resources, like the sites where we harvest our wild rice, or in our language we call manuman, the good berry, medicinal plants, fish, game, maple sap, and birch bark. Nickel sulfide mines, like the Tamarack mine proposal by international mining conglomerate Talon Metals in partner with Rio Tinto, have a long history of damaging land and watersheds. They leave a legacy of contamination long after they've been closed or abandoned, and there's no evidence that these mines can operate safely. Pollutants have ripple effects in the water-rich environment in Minnesota. Our pristine wetlands are the wetlands that recharge our drinking water for our communities. These interconnected wetlands carry water across the landscape through rivers, streams, lakes, and groundwater flows. Critical drinking water sources and aquatic habitats throughout the Mississippi and St. Croix watersheds could be impacted by the pollution associated with nickel sulfide mines. And the size of the proposed Tamarack mine continues to expand, which will put more of our resources at risk. That's why we as the Mille Lacs Band created our own campaign for education on the issues and the dangers of nickel sulfide mining called Water Over Nickel, which is an initiative to protect Minnesota's people, natural resources, and cultural sites from the negative impacts of nickel mining. Certain mining projects, like the proposed Tamarack mine, are advanced in the name of green energy, justifying their need to support electric vehicle battery production. We believe the pursuit of green energy technology and solutions to the climate crisis are crucial, but not at the expense of Indigenous people, the broader Minnesota population, our environment, and our water. Minnesota and the nation haven't fully explored other options to meet nickel demand, like recycling nickel and metal waste, and there are alternative ways to advance green energy solutions. But there is no alternative to water. We ask Minnesotans to commit to preserving our state's unique natural environment and resources for those generations to come. We get only one chance to protect our pristine waters for the future.
And anyhow, I'm Bob Tamman from Sudan, Minnesota, home of Minnesota's first iron mine. Our underground mine was opened up in 1883 and finally shut down in 1962. I started working in the open pit iron mines in the late 60s, so I was there for the booming 70s and the bust in the 80s and the ups and downs since then. So we've had 140 years of mining in Minnesota to gain some understanding of the economic and environmental consequences of mining. Economically, in the early 80s, we had 14,000 mining employees. Last year, 4,000. The Department of Commerce tells us that mining is less than 1% of Minnesota's economy. Environmentally, we know that we have a 140-mile dead zone for wild rice in the St. Louis River. I live in the 1854 treaty area. My home is within 5 miles of the Boys Fort Reservation on Lake Vermilion. When our indigenous neighbors signed that 1854 treaty, they retained the right to hunt and gather. They have the right to harvest wild rice. We should be cleaning up the St. Louis River. In our younger years, my wife Pat and I spent a lot of time in the Boundary Waters canoe area. We cared about clean water. I personally sampled water downstream of our mining operations. Our mines are degrading our public waters, and probably one of the most egregious is the Duncus site, which you've heard something about. The Duncus site was an open pit iron mine. When they went to open it up, the Duluth complex copper-nickel formation was on top of the iron. Back then they regarded it as waste rock, overburden. They scraped it back, piled it up. When the air and water hit that, you had acid mine drainage, heavy metals going into Birch Lake and on into the Boundary Waters. That mine was closed down in 1994. The state of Minnesota and the mining industry have had 30 years to clean up that mine site. I checked the water last summer. That water is still degraded. We should be skeptical about mining the Duluth complex. So the geologists tell us, on the average, that ore body is less than 1% mineralization. We're going to have 99% waste. The final grind is a consistency of face powder. It's going to take a lot of energy. The mining promoters try to tell us this is about green energy. I don't believe we should take them seriously. Mining in the Duluth complex will be a wetland killer and an energy pig. In 1974 and 75, I helped build Hibbing taconite. And I learned then that that property is where the 3 major watersheds in Minnesota come together. If you get a little rain shower on that spot, you could have water going north to Canada, Hudson's Bay, east to Lake Superior, south, Mississippi River. And so when you consider that the state of Minnesota is unable to regulate the Duncus site, we shouldn't be confident that they can regulate twin metals and polymet and talon metals.
Right.
Our water is moving. Our water ends up in Detroit and Winnipeg and New Orleans. When we defend Minnesota's water, we're defending everybody's water. Toni Morrison once said that all water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to return to where it was. Eventually, somebody else is going to get Minnesota's water. Let's be good neighbors and send them clean water. Let's prove it first. Thank you.
Well, it warms my heart to see all these little kids in here. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Molesca, and I'm a lifelong resident of the rural Hibbing area. I was a miner for 42 years, and I actually served as a local union steward and as union president, right in the middle of the Iron Range. Consider this. These mining companies are here for profit. They intend to dig the money out of the ground, not build our schools or anything like that. And along the way, they come along with promises that tell us that with the current regulatory restrictions and technology, mining pollution is a thing of the past. And consider that people begin to believe that, despite a 100% track record of failure of these mining companies to protect clean water. Then consider that the state and federal agencies are likely to permit these mines. What we have then is the most polluting industry operating in the most pristine area of lakes and streams, in the most pristine part of the most pristine state in the USA.
Right. Right.
It's worth repeating. The most polluting industry operating in the most pristine area of lakes and streams in the most pristine part of the most pristine state in the USA.
Yes.
Then let's say somebody notices a fish kill, or no swimming signs are popping up all over, or workers are getting sick, or there's dust in the air here and there all over the place, or worse yet, fish consumption advisories that tell us that mercury contaminated fish are causing brain cancer in our kids. Then comes the realization that the mine operator is polluting our environment. Will a mine be closed? In my experience as a elected union representative and a miner, closing a mine is almost impossible. For an example, the mine I worked at had a airborne asbestos-like particle and fugitive silica dust problem. The Mine Safety and Health Administration and the mining company executives and engineers decided that rather than repair the problem, we're going to get all the men that work in that facility to shave their beards, and anybody that goes there has to wear a mask. Here we have a mine that's putting out a discharge of hazardous materials, and rather than fix the problem, we modify the humans. We got a bit of a problem with that. How much will our communities and our environment be expected to change to accommodate this type of mining? This most polluting type of mining? I don't want to answer that question. I want to see legislators stand up to these mining companies and ask them for one simple thing. Prove that you won't pollute before you're ever permitted to put a single shovel in the ground.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, buddy. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I stand here today to talk about the devastating impact of Glencore's activities in my home country, Cameroon, and the risk it poses to Minnesota environment and communities. Cameroon is a country in Central Africa with a diverse economy, and like Minnesota, rich in natural resources. And Cameroon has a population of about 28.6 million people. Cameroon natural resources have the potential to drive economic growth and prosperity if managed judiciously. But with companies like Glencore doing business with the government of Cameroon, these potentials to alleviate poverty is almost impossible. Glencore track records of corruption in Cameroon is alarming. As a native of Cameroon, I have witnessed firsthand the corrupt practices of Glencore in my home country. Glencore bribes to government officials was not limited to securing oil and gas contracts, but also to secure deals to pay reduced taxes and royalties. In Cameroon, the company flew in millions of dollars on private jets to bribe government officials, securing lucrative contracts. This corruption perpetuated poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation, causing irreparable harm to my fellow Cameroonians. Human rights lawyer and the founding vice president of Transparency International, Barrister Kere Muna, has been pressuring Glencore to release the names of the government officials that it bribed, and the company has yet to do so. Glencore, operating in Cameroon, what has become of the natural resources? Was the economic potential we were promised by the government realized? The government of Cameroon relies on taxes and royalties from its natural resources to supply basic needs to its citizens and develop the country's economic and social infrastructure. But Glencore was able to bribe its way out of paying taxes and royalties. One of the impacts of this is that the life expectancy of Cameroonians is 60 years after birth. Behavior from companies like Glencore makes it challenging for the government to meet these needs, causing my fellow Cameroonians to continue to live in abject poverty, with some or most of them living below $1 a day. Glencore corrupt practices are not limited only to Cameroon. The company has been accused of bribery and corruption in Nigeria, in Côte d'Ivoire, in Equatorial Guinea, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in several other African countries. Its corrupt activities have also gone unnoticed, not gone unnoticed in the West. The U.S. Justice Department criminally indicted Glencore under the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, and Glencore entered a settlement. They have also faced lawsuits in England and Brazil for corruption. In Brazil, Glencore pleaded guilty for bribery and market manipulation and were forced to pay more than $1.1 billion to the US, the UK, and Brazil. NJ Ayok, a Cameroonian and chairman of the African Energy Chambers, has publicly stated that Glencore is the worst company in the energy sector, and he's surprised that countries are still doing business with Glencore. With the inherent environmental dangers surrounding sulfide mining and given Glencore's egregious history of not playing by the rules, it is unconscionable to trust the company to follow environmental regulations in Minnesota. The risk of sulfide mining is already significant, and granting a permit to a company with such a questionable record will be irresponsible. By barring corrupt and polluting companies from operating in Minnesota, the Bad Actor Bill is designed to prevent what happened in my native country of Cameroon from happening in Minnesota. I urge you to prioritize the well-being of Minnesotans over the profits of this Swiss-based company. Our states and communities deserve better than to be put at risk by a company with a proven record of corruption and disregard of the law. Thank you very much for your attention.
Say that it does my heart so much good to see so many people here that are committed. It gives me a little optimism and a little hope, and I haven't had much of that since January 20th. So it's a good feeling. Thank you. Thank you. It's my privilege to speak with you about financial assurance, and this is a law that's supposed to protect Minnesota taxpayers from environmental cleanup costs. There is a law on the books today, but it doesn't work. So what I want to propose are some changes to that law that would set the bar so high that, frankly, the mining companies would probably choose to do business elsewhere, and that's just fine with me. I grew up in Butte, Montana, and Butte is one of the sites of the largest Superfund mining site in the country. Butte has been the center of America's most intensive industrial cleanup efforts. It's a former copper mine, but it still remains, after 30 years of Superfund activity, one of the most toxic sites in the nation. A Superfund designation is by definition proof that financial assurance failed. Financial assurance is supposed to protect the taxpayers from the costs of cleaning up mining environmental damage. But in fact, it doesn't always work. There are 1,340 Superfund sites in the United States today. And that's 1,340 examples of where the taxpayer ultimately had to help shoulder the cleanup costs, the environmental cleanup costs of mining activity. Here's an extraordinary fact. The mining industry uses bankruptcy as a strategic tool to avoid its environmental cleanup responsibility. That's amazing. This is not an accident. This is how these mining companies choose to do business. You would think that with the significant number of bankruptcies in the industry, that this industry is particularly risky or unprofitable. That's not the case. That would be an incorrect assumption. The 5 largest global mining companies, with Glencore being the #1 mining company in the world in terms of size, collectively generated $427 billion of revenue and $52 billion of operating income in the last 12 months. In the last 12 months. We don't need to feel that these companies are struggling from a financial standpoint, and we don't need to help them increase their profitability. These companies are using bankruptcy as a deliberate tactic to enrich themselves. Mining companies operate differently than other industries. When a mining company finds an ore body, frequently on public land, they form a shell corporation. That shell corporation makes environmental commitments, it operates the mine, it generates revenue, it generates profits, and they distribute those profits to shareholders. Once the ore body is depleted, the cleanup bill comes along. And at that point, the mine has no further economic value to these companies. The ore is gone. They're not going to receive any additional profitability or future cash flows. So at that point, when the cleanup bill comes, they file that shell corporation in bankruptcy. And they walk away from their obligations, but the profits that their investors have already received stays with those investors. So the profits have been distributed, the environmental liabilities come due, and there's no money left in this shell corporation. This scenario has played itself out hundreds of times. In response, states have passed financial assurance legislation. There are 29 states that have passed financial insurance laws, including Minnesota. And those laws are to ensure that there's the environmental damage is going to be paid for by the mining companies that have caused that damage. However well-intentioned these financial insurance laws are, they haven't been sufficient to do the cleanup. Mining companies file for bankruptcy when the ore runs out. The laws allow them to return profits to shareholders while leaving the environmental liabilities unpaid. This directly contradicts a fundamental financial principle that debt should take priority over equity. Debt obligations should be paid before investors receive any returns. Minnesota's current financial assurance laws fail to protect either its environment or its taxpayers. Take, for example, Polymet. Polymet put forth a financial assurance package, and our DNR approved that package. The package was that they would spend $2 million in cash a year for the first 9 years to meet their environmental obligations. That's a total of $18 million, 9 years into a mine that had a 20-year life. And the estimated size of the environmental obligation was $1 billion. So half of the mining life has already passed, and we've got $18 million towards a $1 billion obligation. This example illustrates that Minnesota's DNR and the current financial legislation is a failure. Investors profit and taxpayers are left holding the bag. It's time to fix this broken system in Minnesota. We need legislation that reflects the realities of depletion industries. We need independent third parties to determine what the projected environmental liability will be when mines are being permitted. And then we've got to require that mining companies fully fund their cleanup responsibilities in bankruptcy-proof escrow accounts, and these obligations have to be paid in cash in equal installments over the life of the mine. Now, this isn't caving in to the mining industry. I believe that these restrictions would set the bar so high that most mining activity, most of these large mining companies, international mining companies, wouldn't be interested in doing business here. But if they did do business here, they would be responsible for essentially prepaying in cash their environmental damage. This is financial assurance that works. This is how we protect the environment in Minnesota and the taxpayers in Minnesota. Let's make it happen.
My name is Claire Peterson. I'm 18 years old, a freshman in college, and currently attend the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. For 2 years, I was a high school intern at the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge and a youth environmental justice advocate at Climate Generation, where I helped plan a conservation conference for youth around the Twin Cities. When I was younger, I would go hiking with my dad to Duluth along the North Shore, the river at Interstate State Park, or the bank of the Mississippi River bottoms. These experiences have allowed me to realize my passion for the outdoors. Someday, I hope to become an environmental engineer, where I'll work to protect what little natural spaces we have left and bridge the gap between the built and natural worlds. As the effects of climate change are increasingly hard to ignore, becoming an environmental engineer goes beyond a love for the outdoors. It has become a responsibility to keep our communities safe. 2 years ago, I was able to visit the Boundary Waters for the first time in my 16 years of existence. It might be confusing as to why someone who has just started college, has been to the Boundary Waters, and has little experience in political activism is here to speak to you today. Despite all this, I know, without a doubt, that the Boundary Waters is a special place. It has the ability to connect people to each other and the world around them in a way that no other place can. While I was in the Boundary Waters, I got to see loons and snapping turtles, beavers and minks, and garter snakes and eagles. I even got to hug a 1,000-year-old cedar tree. I hauled 30-pound bags and canoes through the wilderness for 4 days, of course. My crew and I woke up at 5 a.m. every morning so we could get an early start on paddling. We had to work together to support and motivate each other through long portages. It was hard, but through it all, I got to connect with my peers. It was a beautiful and wonderful experience I am deeply privileged to have shared with my friends. I know I will cherish the memories I made in the Boundary Waters for the rest of my life. My hope for the future is that young people like myself can continue to discover and fall in love with the Boundary Waters, where they can witness its unspoiled beauty year after year. The decision to pass these bills, prove it first, bad actor, financial assurance, will not affect the next 20 years of my life. It will affect the next 70 years of my life. And I, for one, would much rather spend the rest of my life planning Boundary Waters trips with my family, rather than trying to cleanse it of sulfide sludge. I urge you to act. The Boundary Waters is a sanctuary that should be preserved for the future. Just as the people need the Boundary Waters needs us. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Senator McEwen. What a true voice. And let's hear it for all the witnesses here. Let's hear it for all of you. And I want to give all of you a round of applause, including these students. So let's hear this. So what we're doing, we're creating a movement. This is not just a moment in time, at 10:30 or whatever, or 11:30 on one day. This is a movement that extends over time and over generation. And it's from a grassroots bottom up. It's grassroots bottom up. We are not being heard by a lot of these elected officials in these offices here at the Capitol here. And it's your voice, our collective voice, that's going to make that difference. And so we're in it for the long haul. We're in it for the, as Commissioner Applegate said so eloquently, for 7 generations into the future. We are not looking for just, a moment in time, but for generations and generations to come here. And so your voice is so important. We at Friends of the Boundary Waters, we're extensions of all of you. You are the strength of this movement, and it is our honor to work on your behalf. We're just talking about common sense measures for the future. And so, Come to us. We want direct action for our elected officials. Governor Walz needs to hear from us. Your state senator needs to hear from us. Your state representative, our members of Congress need to hear from us. Because right now they're not listening to us. That threat is out there. That sort of Damocles is right out there. And it's time to act. Prove it first, bad actor, taxpayer protection. Let's make a difference. I want to thank all of you. Let's take action now. Thank you.